The Four Cs, Cash and Central Combined Capabilities by A.B. Fiveash
and Gracie Casper. What is poverty? Poverty is lacking the resources and opportunities to live a minimally decent and dignified life.
How should we measure poverty? We believe that poverty should be measured through the supplemental poverty measure and the capabilities approach. Instead of including all 10 of Nussbaum's central capabilities, we chose the ones we believed were the 5 most important ones. We will be measuring bodily health and senses, imagination, and thought quantitatively, and emotions, affiliation, and play through a quality of life survey.
Next, we'll be looking at the OPM, the official poverty measure, a poverty measure utilized by the United States federal government today, determines poverty rates based on gross annual pre-tax cash income absolutely, asking whether American citizens have enough income to satisfy basic needs such as food, clothes, utilities, and shelter. A threshold of 3 times a thrifty food basket was established to accommodate the average American household, spending 1/3 of their annual income after taxes on food. Despite the OPM providing historical comparisons and making adjustments for inflation, it remains outdated due to the changes in spending patterns. Additionally, the OPM threshold accounts for family composition and size, but does not include diverse family structures, such as cohabiting partners that are prevalent today. More limitations of the OPM include that it neglects to consider the geographic differences in housing costs. Arguably, the most important limitation of the OPM is that it does not account for non-cash benefits such as SNAP, tax credits, housing vouchers, and free breakfast and lunch for kids. Because of these limitations, we propose using the SPM as our monetary measure. On the right, there is a model from Schreider's article, Poverty in the United States, showing the demographics of poverty using the OPM from 2021 to 2022. The Supplemental Poverty Measure, or the SPM, measures poverty not only through pre-tax cash income, including government cash income benefits, but also by looking at meeting one's basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. To measure this, the SPM adds in all of the resources one is given. It takes into account non-cash benefits such as SNAP, NSLP, housing vouchers, tax credits, Social Security, and more. Cohabiting partners, and geographical differences in housing costs. Because the SPM takes these factors into consideration, it proves to be a much more accurate indicator of poverty than the OPM. For example, imagine 2 households. One has a family that makes $20K a year, while the other also makes $20K a year, but receives $10K in SNAP benefits. Who is better off? According to the OPM, these households are on the same level because the OPM does not account for non-cash benefits, such as SNAP. But according to the SPM, the second house is clearly better off because they are receiving an extra $10K in food, meaning they can allocate the entirety of their income to basic necessities, while the first house must use their $20K to purchase food in addition to basic needs. Because the SPM accounts for non-cash benefits in addition to income, it provides a much more accurate image of poverty. In another case, because the SPM takes into account more diverse family structures, such as cohabiting partners, this measure provides a clearer portrayal of poverty. For example, imagine a household that contains a mother, her 3 children, and her boyfriend of many years. According to the OPM, this mother is solely providing for her 3 children because her boyfriend is not related by either blood or marriage. But in reality, she provides for her kids using her income and the income of her boyfriend. This household may not be in poverty because of the added income of her boyfriend. Because the SPM considers cohabiting partners, the boyfriend's income is also accounted for, providing a much more accurate picture of whether the household can attain food, clothing, shelter, and utility resources. Once these resources are determined, the next step of the SPM step is to subtract the non-discretionaries, all the aspects you have to pay for, such as taxes and medical expenses. Next, let's look at the threshold. The threshold for SPM was created by taking 83% of the median expenditures of FCSU, food, clothing, shelter, utilities, and multiplying it by 1.2. In basic terms, if your income increases, your ability to get all of your FCSUs will increase, ultimately increasing your quality of life. Lastly, take a look at this model, used in Schreider's article, Poverty in the United States, which greatly shows the positive impacts that non-cash benefits had on poverty. For example, as shown on the top bar, Social Security benefits lifted 28.9 million people above the poverty line. In addition, programs such as SNAP and school lunch move 5.1 million people from poverty. These are just two of many examples from Schreider. We decided to utilize the SPM in our approach on how to measure poverty because ultimately, income is a key cause of poverty. Without taking income into consideration, one would not be able to measure poverty because income is the source of all resources, which provides us with a better quality of life.
It is clear that the SPM provides us with vital information regarding satisfying basic needs. But I ask, why do we care if people have food, clothing, shelter, and utilities needs met? Because these basic necessities must be attained in order to live a minimally decent quality of life. While the SPM provides an accurate representation of poverty based on income and non-cash benefits, it lacks extensive insights about well-being. In order to capture the true image of poverty, we must look beyond the SPM. For example, imagine two households where both make $20,000 a year. One household is perfectly healthy, while the other has a member suffering from chronic asthma. According to the SPM, they're considered equal. However, when you look at their true well-being, the house with chronic asthma is at an extreme disadvantage. They have to pay monthly expenses for medicine and treatment, yet this blow to quality of life is not taken into account in the SPM. Because we greatly value quality of life, we believe that poverty must be measured through the capabilities approach, in addition to the SPM, to respect the dignity of all human beings. The capabilities approach, a poverty measure refined by Martha Nussbaum and Amartya Sen, uses the idea of capabilities and functionings to evaluate social injustice and quality of life, aiming to achieve human dignity. Functionings are beings and doings, or the various conditions and activities that someone has accomplished. Capabilities are the total set of possible beings and doings, or the things you could be or do if you choose to. Central capabilities, specifically, are essential for providing a minimally decent life suited for the dignity that all humans should possess. Nussbaum created her own list of 10 central capabilities, which include life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination and thought, emotions, practical reason, affiliation, other species, play, and control over one's environment. In our measuring of poverty, in addition to the SPM, we propose conducting a quality of life survey based on the capabilities approach. While some may argue that the capabilities approach is too subjective or difficult to measure, we believe its assessment of poverty is imperative in capturing true well-being. Some people may ask which capabilities matter, or how do you decide if someone has enough? We, along with Nussbaum, have determined these capabilities based on what is needed for a minimally decent life. While what defines a minimally decent life could look different for everyone, certain consensuses can be made over those who have enough and those who do not. The area in between is more of a gray area, but that is an issue of every poverty measure. We have selected 5 of Nussbaum's 10 capabilities in which we believe are vital to a minimally decent and dignified life. Without bodily health, senses, imagination and thought, emotions, affiliation, and play, could a minimally decent life be attained? Can you imagine a life without laughter or doing the things you love? Would a life devoid of relationships and people who care about you be worth living? We and any reasonable human being argue that it would not. While the capabilities approach may be more difficult to measure, it is not impossible. Both bodily health through access to healthcare, food and housing insecurity, life expectancy, child mortality and nutrition, and senses, imagination and thought through years of schooling, school attendance, test scores, graduation rates, and literacy rates can be measured quantitatively. Despite it being difficult to precisely and quantitatively measure the remaining capabilities on our list, emotions, affiliation, and play can be measured by surveying. Some may argue a quality of life survey to be too subjective since well-being may look different to everyone, but the entire reason why Sen favored the capabilities approach was its consideration of differences in need. As Roybin stated in the Capability Approach article, a strong acknowledgement of human diversity is one of the key theoretical driving forces of the capabilities approach. Even though our approach is not perfect, we believe that considering quality of life and well-being respects the dignity of all human beings and is better than the alternative of strictly looking at a monetary measure to determine poverty. Some may argue that money is the only thing that matters, and while we agree that money is imperative to measuring poverty, we must ask, why does money matter? The resources we attain, including basic necessities such as food, shelter, clothing, and utilities, stem from the dollars in our pocket, and having enough resources tells us about our quality of life. In simpler terms, money tells us about essential capabilities such as health and educational opportunities. For example, imagine two families who both make $20K a year, but the child of one family has significant learning disabilities. According to the SPM, these two families are equal, but in reality, one family suffers significantly more in quality of life. In his anti-welfare position and belief that poverty is already over-exaggerated in the United States, Robert Rector, a member of the Heritage Foundation, would argue against the quality of life emphasis of the capabilities approach. Taking an absolute approach, Rector believed that poverty was defined by an extreme deprivation of material possessions, such as food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, or simply lacking the basic necessities to survive. Rector argued that the U.S. Census Bureau's report of 30 million Americans living in poverty was very misleading because the average poor household has a car, air conditioning, color TVs, a DVD player, a VCR, more living space than the average European home today, and access to an adequate amount of food and health care. Rector would argue against the capabilities approach because he already believes Americans overestimate the amount of people in poverty and would not support further government welfare spending. We disagree with this approach because amenities are not an accurate indicator of health and well-being. For example, someone may own a refrigerator but be unable to afford food or electricity, or someone could own a TV but only because they are working 3 jobs with egregious hours. While our measurement of poverty may not be perfect, it provides an accurate image of well-being and quality of life in ways that Rector's approach and strictly using a monetary measure do not. In order to accurately measure poverty while providing a minimally decent and dignified life to all human beings, we must measure poverty through the SPM and the capabilities approach. Here is our works cited Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3.